Somewhere in Jerusalem, around 700 years before anyone had heard the name Jesus, a man sits down to write. His name is Isaiah, son of Amoz. The city outside his window still has its walls. The temple is still standing. The king is still on his throne. But Isaiah has seen things, visions that came to him like weather, sudden and total. And the visions will not let him rest. So he writes. Day after day, year after year, he writes about fire and judgment and a nation slowly forgetting who it belongs to. He writes about a servant who will come and suffer in a way that hasn't happened yet. He writes about a king, a specific king with a specific name, who hasn't been born yet and won't be for another 150 years. He writes 66 chapters, and then he stops. The Bible, the full Christian Bible, has 66 books, 66, the same number. And most people hear that and think, yes, interesting, what a coincidence, and they keep scrolling. But if you stay with it for just a moment, if you actually sit with what that number means and refuse to let yourself move past it too quickly, something starts to form. Quiet. In the back of your mind. Because it doesn't stop at the number. There is a name written inside Isaiah, a specific name, a king's name, written 150 years before that king was ever born. We will get to that name, but not yet. First, you need to understand what kind of world Isaiah was writing in, because it matters. The year is somewhere around 740 BC. Isaiah is in Jerusalem. To the north, the Assyrian Empire is doing what empires do, swallowing smaller nations whole, deporting populations, erasing identities. The northern kingdom of Israel is already fracturing. Judah, the southern kingdom where Isaiah lives, is watching and getting nervous. The kings are making political calculations. The people are doing what people do when they're afraid, looking for shortcuts, making compromises, burning offerings to gods that aren't there. And into all of that, Isaiah starts writing. He will write for decades. He will write under at least 4 different kings. And when he is done, the scroll will contain 66 chapters, one for every book that would one day make up a Bible he didn't know was coming. Here is what makes that number more than a curiosity. The Bible has 66 books, yes, but those 66 books are not one thing. They split. The Old Testament has 39 books. The New Testament has 27. 39 plus 27, 66. Isaiah has 66 chapters, and those 66 chapters split in exactly the same place. Chapters 1 through 39, the first half of Isaiah, read like the Old Testament. Judgment, warning, fire. A God who is not playing games with a people who keep pretending he is. The language is hard. The images are stark. Nations fall. Kings fail. There is mercy woven through it, but you have to look for it. And then chapter 40 arrives. Everything changes. The first word of Isaiah chapter 40 in Hebrew is nachamu, comfort. But Isaiah doesn't just say it once. He doubles it. Nachamu, nachamu, comfort, comfort my people. As if the word alone isn't enough. As if the weight of the first 39 chapters needs 2 words to even begin lifting it. Chapters 40 through 66, the second half of Isaiah, read like the New Testament, grace, restoration, a servant who suffers on behalf of others, a promise that the story isn't finished, a voice that keeps saying, come back, it's not too late. 27 chapters in the second half of Isaiah. 27 books in the New Testament. But it gets stranger. Go back to the first half. Chapter 1 of Isaiah opens with God making a case against his own people. He calls heaven and earth as witnesses. He says, I raised children, and they turned away from me. He uses the image of an ox that knows its owner, a donkey that knows its master's feeding trough. But Israel doesn't know. Israel doesn't understand. That is almost word for word, the opening grief of the Old Testament story, Genesis, Exodus, the pattern of a people given everything, choosing otherwise, and a God who keeps showing up anyway. Isaiah 1 and the Old Testament begin in the same place, the same ache, the same refusal to walk away. And then there is King Ahaz. Ahaz is one of Isaiah's kings, a man who had every reason to trust and chose, quietly and consistently, not to. Assyria is closing in. The political situation is bad. God, through Isaiah, offers Ahaz something almost no one gets offered. Ask me for a sign, any sign, whatever you need to believe I'm here. Ahaz refuses. He says, I will not test the Lord. It sounds humble. It isn't. It's the religious language of a man who has already decided and doesn't want to be argued out of it. So Isaiah tells him, fine, you won't ask for a sign. You're getting one anyway. A young woman will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel, God with us. 700 years later, Matthew will quote that line directly, word for word, and point to a birth in Bethlehem. Ahaz didn't live to see it, but the sign he refused to ask for landed anyway, just not for him. Here's the part nobody tells you. Isaiah's own name, in Hebrew, Yeshuayahu, means the Lord saves. The man writing this scroll, the man whose name sits at the top of 66 chapters, is walking around with the word salvation built into his identity. And the servant he keeps writing about in the second half, the one who suffers, the one who carries grief, the one through whose wounds people are healed, that servant's story points toward a name that shares, in Hebrew, the same root. Isaiah, Yeshua, the Lord saves. It has always been sitting right there in the text. Now we come to Isaiah 53, and this is where things get quiet. Isaiah 53 is the chapter that has stopped people mid-read for centuries. Rabbis have argued about it. Scholars have written libraries trying to explain it. Because what Isaiah describes in those verses, still 700 years before the crucifixion, reads like someone who was standing there watching. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. The Hebrew word Isaiah uses for the figure in this chapter is Eved Yahweh, the servant of the Lord. And the question of who that servant is has occupied scholars for 2,000 years. Isaiah doesn't give a name, he just describes. And the description fits one figure so precisely that the early church didn't argue it, they just pointed. This is the chapter that made Jerome, one of the most serious scholars the early church ever produced, stop and call Isaiah something he called no other prophet. He called him the fifth evangelist, not a historian, not a poet, an evangelist, someone telling good news. Jerome sat with this scroll in the 4th century and said, this man was not predicting, he was witnessing. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy threw a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard something break. What broke was a clay jar. Inside the jar was a scroll, and that scroll, when it was unrolled, examined, and dated, turned out to be the oldest surviving manuscript of Isaiah ever found. It dated to approximately 125 BC, over 2,000 years old. It contained all 66 chapters, intact, unchanged. Scholars had long suspected the book was written in 2 parts by 2 different authors. Because the shift between chapter 39 and chapter 40 is so dramatic, it seemed impossible for one person. But the scroll gave them no seam, no break in the handwriting, no evidence of a different author picking up where another left off. 66 chapters, 1 scroll, 1 voice. Now, the name. In Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28, and chapter 45, verse 1, Isaiah writes the name of a king, not a symbol, not a type or a figure, an actual historical king, name by name, given a specific task. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt. He will say of the temple, let its foundations be laid. The name is Cyrus. Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, the man who, in 539 BC, would conquer Babylon and issue the decree allowing Jewish exiles to return home and rebuild their temple. Isaiah wrote that name, that specific task, 150 years before Cyrus was born. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 1st century, records something that stayed with him. He says that when Cyrus came to power, the Jews showed him the scroll of Isaiah. They showed him his own name, written in a text older than anyone alive could remember. And Josephus says Cyrus was moved, that he believed it was about him, that this belief was part of why he issued the decree. A king reading his own name in a scroll written before his civilization existed. You can find a way to explain that. People have been trying for a very long time, but you cannot make the name disappear. It is there. In the 44th chapter of a 66-chapter scroll, written by a man who died long before the empire that would produce that king had any power at all. Jerome didn't call Isaiah the 5th evangelist because he was reaching for a compliment. He called him that because he read what Isaiah wrote and recognized the shape of it, the same shape as Matthew, the same shape as Luke, the same shape as John, a story moving towards something, a servant arriving, a wound that somehow heals, a voice in a wilderness saying, "Make way, something is coming." All of it inside a scroll with 66 chapters, the same number as the Bible it was somehow already describing. There is something that stays with you after you sit with Isaiah long enough. It isn't certainty. It isn't the feeling of having solved something. It's more like standing in a room and slowly realizing the room is larger than you thought, that the walls you assumed were the edges aren't the edges at all. Isaiah wrote in a world of failing kings and closing armies, and a people who had mostly stopped listening. He wrote towards something he could see but couldn't fully name. He wrote 66 chapters that split in the same place as the 66 books that came after him. He wrote a servant suffering 7 centuries before it happened. He wrote a king's name 150 years before that king drew his first breath. And what you do with that, whether it lands as coincidence or something that quietly refuses to be coincidence, that's not something anyone can decide for you. But the scroll is still there. It has been there for over 2,000 years, sitting unchanged in the dark of a cave until a shepherd boy threw a rock and found it. It survived everything. Every empire that rose and fell around it, every century that tried to bury it, or burn it, or simply forget it. It waited. Isaiah didn't know your name. He didn't know this moment, or this screen, or whatever you were doing before you stopped and watched this. But he wrote 66 chapters that somehow already knew the shape of the book they were living inside. Maybe that means something. Maybe it means everything. Maybe you're still figuring out which. The scroll can wait a little longer while you do.